Hey, DawgNation, welcome to Thursday. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm excited about today's show. A little bit later on, we're actually going to welcome in one of those guys that was the special guest referees, which is normally a phrase I associate with pro wrestling. But in this case, I guess it's also appropriate for G-Day as well. Some of the national media types got a chance to don the officials' gear or be up in the replay booth. One of the guys that did that will be a special guest on our program today. He'll tell us what that was like and also what it's like to be on hand in Athens for G-Day and what he saw from the Georgia Bulldogs. And we'll start the show with this. Your boy Dan Mullen running that mouth again. My take on this might be a little different than you might think, though. In fact, let's start with that. Now, and by the way, let me also add, huge compliment thrown the direction of Georgia fans, too, that we'll talk about. A lot to cover, a lot of ground. We're glad you're with us for it as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Florida coach Dan Mullins pretty quickly becoming the mouth of the South, it would seem. A lot of talk from Mr. Mullen so far this offseason. He is at it again, and you might think in my role of chief Gator hater, I'd be ready to, put him up and put up my dukes and be ready to fight against him, and I guess I always kind of am in a roundabout way. But my overall take on Mullen's latest barb or jab, not completely directed at Georgia, but also not directed at Georgia, if you get my point on that. Georgia kind of gets caught in the shrapnel of all of this. My overall takeaway on this may be a little different than you might think, and let me see if I can set up all of this way. I am a traditionalist. A lot of y'all know that. I joke all the time about the fact that in spirit, I'm essentially 1,000 years old. If you want to know how I think Georgia football should be, you pretty much just have to go look back to the 80s and say, what was Georgia doing back in the 80s? That's kind of the stuff that I think Georgia should still be doing now. I grew up in that era. I like that era, and I like classic traditional stuff. And that means for me, one of the sacred things when it comes to Georgia football is the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Yes, around here, that is what we call it. We'll always call it that. And we think that is a rivalry in its spot in Jacksonville that is worth preserving. And when I hear younger guys, younger people than me, talk up this rivalry and talk about how it is special, well, you know what? I feel really good about that. So let me give you an example. Go back to before last year's game in October. Isaac Nada, a guy who knows the state of Florida well, who knows the state of Georgia well, who knows these two programs really well, is an example in modern times of what I've grown up believing. That when it comes to that world's largest outdoor cocktail party, when it comes to those beach condos in St. Simon's or Jekyll Island, when it comes to all those, as Larry Munson famously once said, all those dog people who come down there and enjoy that, and the property that gets sometimes figuratively, maybe in some cases literally destroyed. Well, listen, that's all a lot of fun for me, so I really appreciate it when a guy like Isaac Nada shows that same appreciation, which he did before this past year's game. Here's what he said then.
I spent a lot of time in Jacksonville. I lived there for about 8 years. Just playing in this game. I've been a part of it, as a fan. It's awesome. It's literally split right down the middle, half and half. It's kind of weird the way people file in because they're all out tailgating beforehand. So when everybody gets in there, it gets crazy. And it's just a really cool atmosphere. It's probably one of the best atmospheres in college football.
I mean, listen to the sound of Nada's voice when he says that. I'm going to take that to mean that he means what he says when he says those words, how special it is and how cool the vibe in the stadium is. And I'm an old guy, so I like old things. Cocktail party's been around for a long time. But to hear young guys say, I like it too. I'm playing in the game, and I love the vibe around that. I believe it's one of the most special atmospheres in all of college football. That makes me really feel good. And maybe what should also make me feel good for someone who enjoys making that trip, as we did last year and have now for many years down to Jacksonville, is the belief of some that this rivalry game is never leaving the spot. It's always going to be a neutral site game played right here. It'll always be that split 50-50 crowd, and the Georgia fans will always get to enjoy their time on the beach, and the world's largest outdoor cocktail party will last forever. I mean, after all, that's something that DawgNation Chip Towers has said on this program for a number of years, including going back to like 2017 even. Chip was on this program really banging that gong that for the people who think that one day this rivalry is going home and home, they're going to split time between Athens and Gainesville. Chip Towers says, in his mind, that's not what this rivalry is ever going to be about. Here's an example of what he said about this in the past.
Jacksonville wants the game there, and Georgia wants the game there, and Florida wants the game there. We're coming up on 100 years here before long, and I think we'll make that mark. They'll make it to 2033, and the game will still be played in Jacksonville.
So Chip Towers in the past has said that the bond, the tie that unites Georgia and Florida in the city of Jacksonville for this game, known as the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, it is so tight and so well-founded that he thinks this game's going to be in Jacksonville till at least 2033 and maybe beyond that. I got to tell you, I'm not quite so sure as much anymore. I'm just not, I don't know. I feel like there's a movement away from this game being played in Jacksonville. And I can't tell if it's accidental and I can't tell if it's intentional. I think there's a growing sense of, is this really the place this game is supposed to be played? Is this really the best choice for Georgia? Because honestly, we don't care about what's best for Florida, but we do around here care what's best for Georgia. Is Jacksonville really the best spot for Georgia, Florida? And I believe that Florida coach Dan Mullen, who has been running his mouth the entire offseason, saying one dumb thing right after another, I believe that whether it be wittingly or in Dan Mullen's case, probably half-wittingly, unwittingly maybe, I feel like that he has said something this week that I think potentially puts the future of Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville in danger. And for the people who care about that, I don't think that's too much of an overstatement, although maybe slightly exaggerated just a little bit. Let me show you what he said, speaking to the Gator Club, or whatever they call their booster clubs down there. He was in Daytona Beach, the Florida Gators Club down there in Daytona. According to Gatorsports.com, here's the quote from Dan Mullen. Now, this is meant to be kind of one of those red meat things that you toss out to your constituency, but Georgia does get caught up in this. We'll show it to folks. Let me read it. He says, we have 8 home games this year. We're the University of Florida. If we play in the state, it's a home game. Last year, we had a home game in Tallahassee. This year, we have one in Orlando. Now, the last part of that, as quoted by Gatorsports.com from Florida coach Dan Mullen, is meant to be a jab at Florida State, who they beat in Tallahassee a year ago, and meant to be a jab at Miami, whom they play in Orlando to start this season. The honest truth is Florida probably will have a lot more fans in Orlando against Miami than the Hurricanes will, and that's probably a reasonable case to be made. If you go and win in your opponent's stadium, I guess you can call that a home game, although there clearly were more Florida State fans there that day than Florida fans, but whatever gets you the applause in the moment, I'm sure Florida fans ate that up. But what gets caught up in this is the whole notion of 8 home games. Sounds like that Mullins also counting the trip to Jacksonville to play Georgia. Now, on its face, this is patently untrue, and I'll give you more examples even from Mullen, how he's changed his tune on this in a moment. But my point in bringing this up on the program today is not to bag on Mullen, which I have a bunch over the last few days, and will continue to do that because I enjoy doing it. My point is not to get all up in arms about what Mullen says about Georgia because, let's face it, Mullen has said a lot of dumb stuff when it comes to Georgia. My point is, for someone who likes Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville and wants to preserve the heritage of this unique rivalry game played on a neutral site, that Dan Mullen calling it a Florida home game is not helping anything. Because there are a pocket of Georgia fans who believe that is exactly what it is, that it does require additional travel for Georgia, and it's not such a travel burden for Florida. And at this day and age under Kirby Smart, I think the travel issue's probably been rectified just a bit. But in terms of mileage from the home campuses, it's obviously farther from Athens than it is from Gainesville, where Florida calls its home. A lot of Georgia fans say for that reason alone, this rivalry should not be played in Jacksonville every single year. You're essentially gifting Florida by playing this in Florida's home state every single year. And Dan Mullen's not helping things. So either Mullen is playing what we kind of joke about sometimes as, 3D chess. Maybe this is part of his strategy to move this game on campus. But I do believe Mullen's words here are going to move public opinion just a bit. More Georgia fans are now going to say, see, even Dan Mullen thinks it's a Florida home game. But to be fair and balanced and be completely accurate here, Mullen calling this a Florida home game now, not exactly in keeping with what he said on this in the past. In fact, as recently as this year, he admitted that, no, it's not a Florida home game. There aren't more Florida fans there. He uses the same phrase everybody else always uses. He talks about the 50-50 split. In fact, here is Mullen on that point.
Obviously a fun game, great game to be a part of. Florida-Georgia is always such a huge game. And you look at it this year, right, we have the College Game Day, SEC Nation there. You get the CBS National Game of the Week. So it's going to be pretty special. I know it's a lot of fun. For me, it's one of the great scenes in all of college football. You come over the Hart Bridge and you come into Jacksonville right there. And, I mean, all the tailgating, just a sea of people. The stadium split down the middle is pretty exciting and a lot of fun.
In fact, not to put too fine a point on this, but the whole idea that Jacksonville's a home game for Florida, based on Mullen's own description from there, that seems to not quite be accurate. And Kirby Smart himself, after the 19-point Georgia win, I guess we can count this as a road win for UGA's resume last season. But even after that game, Kirby Smart was also talking about the impressive showing of Georgia fans in that game. Here's Kirby.
First of all, the environment in this game was probably the best of the 3 years that I've coached in it. It was thank our fans because they stood behind us, and a lot of passion and energy in those stands. And those fans follow us everywhere, and I appreciate what they do.
So look, the idea that this is a Florida home game is ridiculous based on what Kirby Smart said immediately after the game and what Dan Mullen said right before the game. This is clearly not a pro-Florida crowd in Jacksonville for this game, and as someone who wants to defend the honor of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, I feel it's appropriate to say that. But what's more important from Kirby Smart, not those words you just heard, it's actually a different quote from Kirby Smart. And this is why I fear that Dan Mullen calling this a Florida home game may one day sour some Georgia fans on keeping this game in Jacksonville every single year. I have a sneaking suspicion that Kirby Smart wouldn't mind seeing this game moved as well. I have a sneaking suspicion that he wouldn't mind this game being played in Athens every other year and saying to Jacksonville, we'll see you when we can see you, but we got business to take care of in our home stadium. The reason why I feel that way is something that Kirby said this past year right before the Auburn game. Now, I apologize. I don't have this on audio. I don't really know why I don't have this on audio, but I don't. But I'm going to read it to you nonetheless. Here's what he said about Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville just a few months ago. He says, yeah, absolutely it, meaning playing the game in Jacksonville, cost you a recruiting weekend. Kirby goes on to say, you don't get to have anybody. They don't get to have anybody. So our version of the LSU-Alabama game, that big home game, he says it's held in Jacksonville, and we don't have prospects. So it's not conducive to recruiting. Absolutely it's not. It's just the way it's been done here before. Listen to that phrase. He says it's just the way it's been done here before. It's just not great for recruiting because you lose a home game every other year, and it just comes with it. But it certainly helps to have more home games. How can you listen to Kirby Smart right there and not come away really feeling that maybe Kirby Smart wouldn't mind Jacksonville moving to an Athens-Gainesville rotation? And Dan Mullen saying what he said, I think it kind of puts this rivalry game in the neutral site kind of on thin ice. Now, for a lot of Georgia fans, that may be what they want. For me, I do like the tradition. I'm just not sure how much longer this tradition is going to be able to be preserved. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m. DawgNation, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon as well on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and more from some very interesting content this morning on 960 The Ref a little later on in our program today. And we'll say hello to you on a podcast, wherever you find them, the Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player. And we'll post the show every day for you at the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just really glad you have found us today on DawgNation Daily. As I told you, or I told the video audience before the show started, we're going to have a fun guest in the program today. His name is George Schroeder. He's a national college football writer for USA Today. He was in Athens for G-Day on Saturday. He was one of the guest officials. What's it like to have to do that job that we complain about other people doing during the fall? Well, George will tell us about that, and he'll also share some of his thoughts on what he saw from the Bulldogs coming up a little bit later on, too. We'll talk to George Schroeder from USA Today coming up in just a moment. Before that, let's go around the doghouse here. It's presented today by our friends at Online Trading Academy. And, we just talked a lot about Georgia home games, the fact that maybe one day the Georgia-Florida game may be a home game for UGA. Well, there's certainly a reasonable point to be made that there's never been a better time to play as many big games as you can inside Sanford Stadium in Athens. In fact, go back and look at the last 2 years. Georgia's undefeated at home in each of the last two seasons and has done so in pretty impressive fashion. In fact, to go back to Kirby Smart here for a moment, before another rivalry game that Georgia played this past fall against Georgia Tech, I thought Kirby did a great job of laying out the philosophy that exists at Georgia right now of defending that home territory, making Sanford Stadium a really tough place to play. I thought Kirby Smart did a good job of laying out just how crucial that is for the Georgia program and just how much fans help contribute to that. Here's what Kirby said before Georgia Tech last November.
That's been a message all year. It's not been about Tech, obviously. It's been about the teams that have been championship teams that have defended their home turf. We've got a bulletin board about it. You know, when you win your games at home, it gives you a much better chance of winning the East. When you win your games at home, it gives you a much better chance of winning the SEC. And we've talked about that all along, and we want to continue to do that. And I think that's a big part of it, not because it's Tech, but because it's our home stadium. And we want our fans to come out, support these guys, even over Thanksgiving break. It's critical that we have the momentum and the fan base behind us to make it an advantage for us.
So that's what Kirby Smart says it's really important to do. Now, Georgia went out and did that against Georgia Tech and has done that against everybody over the last 2 years. And apparently the nation is noticing. I saw this tweet on Twitter this week, I guess quoting 24/7 Sports. I saw this from an account known as CFB Home, but it's 24/7 Sports who brings this out. And apparently, according to 24/7 Sports, based on whatever criteria they're using, they are now going to call Georgia as the number 2 home field advantage in all of college football, behind just Clemson, the reigning national champions, ahead even of LSU, Penn State, Texas A&M, programs like that. Alabama's on here at number 8. Auburn, by the way, doesn't even make this list in the top 10. So Georgia is at number 2. Now, the one question I asked yesterday when we were doing some of our conversation on video with our commenters, how many Georgia fans really believe this is true? Because I have heard a level of skepticism, I guess, from some Georgia fans that Georgia really does have the number 2 home field advantage in all of college football. After all, that's kind of a subjective claim. There's not, really a whole lot of objectivity to that. But Kirby Smart, clearly, from based on what we just heard from him a moment ago, seems to believe that's a step that Georgia's taken over the last couple of years. I think later on in the program, when we may talk just a little bit more about this, I thought that was a pretty interesting opinion being shared from 24/7 Sports, and it's kind of interesting to see Georgia rank as high on that list as it did. For now, though, let me remind you that Around the Doghouse is brought to you by our friends at Online Trading Academy. By now, hopefully you know what they do. They give you the opportunity to make the best decision you can possibly make. That's the decision to invest in yourself by learning how to make money in the markets. Really, all kinds of trading styles, all kinds of asset classes. That's what Online Trading Academy gives you a chance to do. So please find them on the line at tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. That's Trading Academy with a D, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. And you can learn how to make the markets work for you and make money there, both in the classroom and online. Check out tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. All right, we'll have more on what we were just saying a moment ago. We'll also preview how Georgia Bulldogs could fare in the NFL Draft, which begins tonight. That's all later on the program. For now, though, as promised, let's talk to George Schroeder from USA Today. And he is a terrific college football writer for a long time at USA Today. He was also on hand for G-Day on Saturday as one of the guest officials there. Listen, I'm as guilty as anybody about complaining about officiating, but I think we'd all find out if we did the job that George had to do on Saturday. It's not as easy as it can sometimes look. George, thanks for being with us here today on DawgNation Daily. We really appreciate your time and look forward to your insight. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I guess let me start off with this. So you're a replay official on Saturday, up during in the replay booth for the game. Do I have that correct?
Yes, you do.
So, I am as frustrated as anybody from time to time about how sometimes I feel like in college football, replay just has a hard time getting the call right, even with a chance to see it on video. And it sounds like from kind of reading your assessment of the situation and kind of being there in the moment, it's not as easy as it looks on TV, is it?
Well, no. I mean, my guess is that goes for most jobs, whether it's the ones we're all paying attention to as sports fans or just about anything else. It's not as easy as it sort of looks, and there's a lot that goes into it. And I think I kind of intuitively knew that about the replay officiating situation, but now I really know it. And it is a complex process that requires a lot of first of all, a lot of knowledge that most of us don't actually have. That's why they use sort of the retired officials model, or the guys who've been officials on the field for some length of time at a high level. And then it requires kind of an ability to process a ton of information in a really quick manner. And we all sort of focus on the ones that take 90 seconds, and we're all sort of, twiddling our thumbs and sitting on our hands and wondering why they can't figure this out. And there are those, obviously, and believe me, they're looking at all sorts of different angles and doing other things that we're not even thinking about. But I found it fascinating just how much they watch between every single play of the play before. Even when you're like, you and I didn't see anything in that play to even look at, which is most plays. And yet they're looking at it from 2 or 3 different angles just because they need to check 2 or 3 different things. And, it's one thing to do it with Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs, who do this weird, odd thing sometimes called huddling and stuff. It's another thing to do it, with these teams that play fastball and every 9 seconds they're clicking off another play. So thank you, Kirby, for the huddle. From one guy who's not very good as a replay official. I don't know how those guys would do it if he was running the hurry up all game long.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Now, in a spring game situation, you're not going to get booed one way or another, but one of the things I've always assumed about being an official is that the act of being watched would make watching the game a little harder to do, knowing there's going to be a strong reaction one way or another to whatever call you make. And for a replay official, that's also true as well. Did you get the sensation of doing this job that people were watching you as you also watched this? Because to me, that would be one of the toughest parts about being a game day referee or an official in the replay booth.
Well, I did not get that so much this year in the replay booth. A year ago, I was a back judge there were all my media colleagues were down on the field in the black and white vertical stripes, trying out their hands as officials. And a year ago at the South Carolina spring game, I was a back judge, and I did sort of get that feeling there. Although the spring game obviously is the right time to try it, and it's so much more relaxed. I suppose there were those fans of the red team who were lifelong fans of the red team and didn't really like the black team, right? It's not quite the same.
Right, not
but
quite.
in the replay booth, I didn't feel the same. I didn't feel quite the same pressure even as I did a year before. Not that I didn't feel pressure to get it right, but there's just, to me, there's a level of
sure.
Not everybody's looking at me on every single play, and I'm not sure that was the case as a back judge, but it kind of felt that way.
So I'm not sure, how much of the overall experience you got to absorb while you're doing what you're doing, but I think the one thing that you would agree with is that G-Day at Georgia, the spring game in general, is still a pretty big deal, and I guess I'm kind of curious about your thoughts about spring games overall. It seems to me that some programs around the country have kind of de-emphasize them a bit. I gather that some coaches don't think it's an exercise worth going through quite as much, but for a place like Georgia, they like making it into a show and they host a bunch of recruits. I guess as a national college football writer, what is your overall opinion of the value of spring games and the place they should have on the college football calendar?
Well, for fans, they're a reasonable facsimile of football, which is great for all of us. But, let's be honest, most of the time the coaches aren't thinking about the fans. They're thinking about recruiting, and they're thinking also about sort of what kind of evaluation and assessment they get of their own team. And from that last standpoint, it's maybe not one of 15 spring practices, which is what they like to sort of minimize it as, but it's certainly kind of one of 3 scrimmages, and maybe it's the most important of those. But it's what you mentioned about what Kirby does with it, and what there's 5 or 10 other programs around the country who are often competing for similar recruits, and with the acceleration of recruiting because of the early recruiting calendars become more important than ever before, I think, to turn it into a showcase if possible for recruits. That's why you hear these guys wanting huge crowds. That's why sometimes they have a big concert. Part of that's for the recruits. A lot of it's to grab the fans, to get them to come in. And it's a huge recruiting day. And so it is a big, big deal for the programs that treat it as such. And I don't think it's quite so easy to say, okay, if you've got that coach who's saying it's not a big deal, it's because he's not in on those recruits. It's not that simple. It's just it's a different philosophy, and it may well be as right as the other guys. It feels odd to hear guys de-emphasizing it, because when you look at Tom Herman at Texas and Kirby Smart at Georgia and Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, and you see what Alabama has done in the past, and and some of that's just fans being excited, but a lot of it is there's some actual efforts made to get them out there.
Yeah.
It's because they're trying to turn it into a recruiting showcase type of, it's not a game. It's not like having a guy come to your campus in September or October, but in April he can get kind of a reasonable facsimile of what it feels like.
So the storyline around Georgia. This is a program of the last couple of years that has been really, really close to breaking through with a national championship, and yet its 2 chief competitors are essentially next-door neighbors. You got Alabama and the SEC, and obviously a lot's been said about these two games. These two teams have played the last couple of years, and of course, Clemson as a recruiting threat and a looming threat where Georgia get back to playoff kind of is a foe to be dealt with as well. Do you get a sense from Georgia thus far this offseason, whether it be just the things you've absorbed or what you saw from Athens on Saturday, about how well it's positioned to kind of go and take on these challengers that it hasn't quite yet vanquished? What's your sense of how Georgia fits into that pecking order as we move towards the season?
Well, in that particular pecking order, you have to put it behind Clemson, Alabama, Clemson. You pick the order. You have to put Georgia behind those guys, but not far behind them. And I look at it in two ways. One, when you look at the Georgia team physically, sort of how they stand out as they step off the bus, that kind of a look, which isn't always a true gauge, but it's not a bad gauge either. They look like those other two teams, and there are very few other teams around the country that maybe look that way. Ohio State has those kinds of athletes, and I kind of makes me think that 2017 Georgia was maybe a little bit ahead of schedule, or it could have been a lot ahead of schedule, and it sort of reset our expectations. 2018 it could have happened. And 2019 might really well have been the year that a lot of people were pointing to as to when this is when the roster could be filled out if all the recruiting goes as planned, and this is when you might have the talent and the depth to really be there. And instead they've sort of been there or almost there earlier. But this feels like a year when, if you're going to have a breakthrough, it could be this year. And I think you got to be patient, because look, everybody's looking up in the SEC to Nick Saban. It isn't just Georgia. It's everybody. Georgia, at least these last couple of years, has been more consistently close to coulda, woulda, shoulda, maybe ought to have beaten Alabama than anybody has, at least on a consistent basis. And so I think you've got to have some patience, but it does feel like this is a good year, and it feels like Georgia's really, really close to doing it. I mean, you just got to take your swings, and at some point, at some point you connect, right? I mean, goodness, if the Bulldogs had been able to finish, we might have a whole different story these last couple of years.
You get a sense Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
George.
go ahead.
No, I said,
you're good.
Do you get a sense the SEC East is ready to be more competitive this year? Georgia has won each of its division games by 2 touchdowns or more in each of the last 2 seasons. I still see a pretty big gap between Georgia and most of this division going into 2019. Obviously, Florida's going to have a very high ranking preseason. Do you see the gap closing in the division at all?
Not yet. I do think Florida's going to be better, and I think Dan Mullen was a terrific hire, and he'll get them, back to competitive. But I do think the East still trails the West in terms of depth. Georgia is as good as anybody in the conference, unless we want to go back to the previous question, maybe not named Alabama. They may be better than Alabama. We'll see. But the rest of the East is not terrific yet. Tennessee's not there. We could kind of go down the list. Kentucky was a nice team, but they were just a nice team, and they're going to take a step back, I think. And, the other thing I would say is this. It's one thing to talk about how easy Georgia's had it in the East, and you mentioned the double-digit scores. Go look at what Alabama's scores are against the West. Mm-hmm. As good as the West, by reputation is, Alabama has pretty much had its way with the West in almost every game over this run they've had. So, but in answer to your question, no. I mean, when you look at the East, Georgia's clearly the class of the East, and you never know what happens in a rivalry game at a neutral site with a team like Florida. It's kind of like that Oklahoma-Texas thing, right? I mean, It doesn't matter who's better. Sometimes those games are just sort of weird games, right? But if you just chalk it up or write it out on paper, mix a few metaphors here. It's hard for me to see a scenario where Georgia doesn't emerge from the East and play in the SEC title game.
Let me squeeze in one more final thing before we let you go. You had good reporting at usatoday.com the other day in Tuscaloosa. Get a chance to be with Nick Saban on the heels of what is a hip replacement surgery for him, I guess. And it sounds like he's back at work. And for a lot of people, this is really surprising that this sounds like a pretty severe procedure, and it sounds like he's going to try to keep it business as usual. George, from your perspective, is that really possible?
Yeah, I think it is, and on 2 levels. One, first of all, I think Nick's a robot, so you got that. But no, and I'm kidding. But no, the way they do these hip surgeries now, apparently you can be back up and moving around immediately, and it's typically an outpatient surgery. A lot of people are walking out of the hospital, and and you can sort of get back to your regular life without golf or running or whatever for a while. But that's the first thing. The second thing is, look, this is the first time that we have seen. The one thing about Nick Saban, who's 67, he turned 68 on October 31st. We all know what day that is, Halloween. So you draw whatever conclusions you want. But the one thing about him is he's always felt like he's 67 going on 57. When he was 62, it felt like he was going on 52. And I always look at it, he's the same age as Mac Brown. And when Mac Brown retired, you look at those two guys, and you thought, one of them looks 10 years younger, and it isn't Mac Brown. And so I've always thought that vitality has been a piece of sort of the puzzle when it comes to sort of the aura around Nick Saban, and there's obviously so much more than that, but vitality's been a big deal. This is the first time that we've really sort of seen sort of a, oh, wow, there's an aging process going on. And so it was interesting, when we talked, he made a point to me to say, the doctor said this isn't a geriatric issue, a geriatric hip, it's more of an athlete hip, and it just sort of comes on after years of grinding. And I don't doubt that that's true. I also don't doubt that that's a piece of the message he wants out there. And I say all that to say, him being up and about and them taking pictures of him standing behind his desk, looking over the myriad details of things that he has to do, you know, on a Tuesday or Wednesday in late April, isn't about showing that he's working, except that it sort of shows there's nothing wrong with Nick Saban. He's still really, vital. And it all goes back to the very first thing you and I talked about, which is you want those recruits to see him as, young and energetic. And I think that's part of the messaging that's going on here. I don't doubt that it's actually the case. I do think it's a message they really want out.
I think it's really interesting, George. It's great reporting. And for folks who want to find out more of the work that you're doing at USA Today, how can we find you online?
Well, I mean, at usatoday.com, or follow me on Twitter, which is just at George Schroeder, and it's George and then Schroeder, and I appreciate that. But hey, listen, I actually don't get to spend a lot of time in Athens because we have a guy who lives in Atlanta. So last weekend in Athens, even though it was maybe not the Chamber of Commerce weather for late April, was a terrific experience and a great chance to sort of catch up on a week when there aren't quite as many people in town as there are. Let me put it this way: there are so many people in town on a real game weekend that I have to stay in Atlanta. So it was great to be in Athens. So I really enjoyed it.
Well, listen, George, I'm glad that Athens showed you hospitality. We appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily. A really fun conversation. Thanks for your insight, and we'll hopefully look forward to catching up with you soon.
Hey, thank you, guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff there from George Schroeder. George is a good writer. It's a guy that I've read for a long time. It's our first time having him on DawgNation Daily, but I did want to get a chance this week to talk to one of those guys who had a chance to be one of those special guest referees for, in this case, replay official for the G-Day game, because I think it's really good insight. And as I've told you all from time to time, I do think it's interesting to kind of go outside the bubble of DawgNation from time to time to find out what folks kind of around the country think about Georgia, because I think it helps us just get a sense of really where Georgia does rank in this pecking order here. And it's not a surprise to hear him say, I'd still have Alabama and Clemson ahead of Georgia right now. As it stands, that's what the consensus opinion nationally is going to be. But that's another national guy, and we've had a few of these lately, who says, no, I'm not completely buying the hype about this being a wide-open SEC East, or about a Florida stepping up and being ready to challenge right now. You heard George say those two simple words, not yet, in terms of that being the case. And I think that's an important part of that national conversation as well. We'll do our SEC 3 here coming up in just a moment. Let me remind you, though, that we're coming down to the wire on what has been an awesome week around DawgNation. I'm talking about the very first ever Georgia Giving Week from our friends at the UGA Alumni Association. A real chance to show the world just how much dogs care about the university and just how loud the dogs can bark, as they like to say. It is Georgia Giving Week here, and it's a chance to support the UGA Alumni Association. Now, this is also a terrific incentive for you on this. Right now, when you make your gift as a part of Giving Week with the UGA Alumni Association, they got a couple things for you. You can get a limited run Georgia pennant magnet, and you also get a 20% discount from the UGA bookstore. Now, y'all know I love the UGA bookstore, so it's a great chance to get that. And also this Georgia pennant magnet sounds pretty cool as well. So it's a chance to propel UGA forward, change the lives of the students on this campus right now. So please be a part of the first ever UGA Alumni Association Giving Week. The website to go to is this, givingweek.uga.edu. It's givingweek.uga.edu. There's just 2 days left to give as a part of this campaign, so please go to the website givingweek.uga.edu for a whole lot more on that. All right, tonight is the NFL Draft, and I guess the big question from a Georgia fan standpoint is DeAndre Baker going to be taken in the first round? Now, we talked at DawgNation. I know Chip Towers wrote about this. I did a DN90 on this the other day about this campaign that seemed to emerge against Baker about whatever may or may not have happened in the week of the Sugar Bowl. I thought it was good that Davin Bellamy stood up to defend Baker on this. I think Baker was always a popular teammate with the UGA guys. I don't necessarily buy McShay's take on this, not because I believe that McShay is lying, but I believe there's a really good chance that whoever talked to McShay about Baker was also lying, because there is a lot of lying that leads up to the start of the NFL Draft. There's a pretty well verifiable history of that. However, I'm not enough of an NFL draftnik to know if Baker's dropping in the draft because of those so-called rumors, or if there's just a deep crop of cornerbacks and that drops him down the pecking order. The one thing I do want on the record right now, and this is not, I mean, it's going to sound like Homer talk, but it's not, because the truth is I don't really care about the NFL all that much. But I do believe that DeAndre Baker will be a better pro than Greedy Williams. And the one, Greedy Williams, the cornerback from LSU, who I would say that Williams has a really good chance of being the first cornerback taken, right? So Baker may be one of the ones that doesn't go in the first round. Greedy may be the first cornerback taken off the board. But the one thing that I keep showing, when I do read the draft analysis, when I see some of these guys talking on TV, the one thing that seems to come up a lot, and I feel like I've seen this with my own eyes, Baker's not the biggest guy in the world, but he is really tough. There is no doubt in my mind, having watched these guys in the SEC the last couple of years, DeAndre Baker's the better tackler of the two. Now, in the NFL, obviously, it's a league about defending wide receivers. You know, cornerbacks, wide receivers in that league seem to get more important every single year, and so that's ultimately how Baker's going to be judged. But you got to be on the field for everything else as well. When it comes down to it, Baker's a better tackler than Greedy. We know that Baker is good in pass coverage, hasn't given up a touchdown in like 2 years or some crazy thing like that. So put it on the record for me. I believe that Baker ends up being the better overall pro. I'll tell you the other thing, that from a Georgia fan standpoint, watching some of these SEC guys in this thing tonight, dynamic pass rushers, a real story here. Quinnen Williams, Josh Allen, Williams obviously from Alabama, Josh Allen from Kentucky, going early in this first round tonight. Georgia has made a big point of wanting to be better with the so-called havoc plays, being more tackles for loss, more sacks, things like that. You have to have seemingly a superstar player emerge in that regard to get that done. Clemson, not an SEC team, but another example of this. They're going to have a ton of pass rushers go early in this draft, and that's the key for Georgia. You want more sacks, you want more tackles for loss, you want more so-called havoc, then you're going to have to find a way to have superstar guys emerge, the way that Williams has for Alabama, Allen did for Kentucky. The Farrell and all those guys from Tennessee. Clemson. Tennessee only wishes. All those guys for Clemson. You're gonna have to find a way to get that done. We'll make that your SEC through. I got a lot of business I want to take care of just for a moment. So let me see if I can kind of squeeze a lot of this into a little bit of time here. If you were watching or listening to the show earlier, we did our Around the Doghouse presented by Online Trading Academy. We talked a little bit about, Kirby Smart's belief that one of the hallmarks of a good program is defending your own turf, being really good in a home field environment. 24/7 Sports recently ranked Georgia as the number 2 home field advantage in all of college football right now, and I'm assuming they're basing this mostly on the fact that Georgia's winning its home games, and after all, what could matter more than that? But I thought it was really funny, and we talked about this in our R.S. Andrews Cool Down on yesterday's show, which is a video comment section we kind of do after the regular broadcast of DawgNation Daily is done. It was amazing to me how many Georgia fans there were like, Georgia's home field advantage is kind of okay. Georgia's winning its home games, but stadium could be louder. The music that's played in the stadium could be better. And I kind of get where some of that's coming from. I do think this has been an evolution that has occurred over time. I guess my point in bringing that up off the top of the show was to say that I do think that reputations can change. Let's face it. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, into the start of the Richt era, I'm not so sure that Sanford Stadium was a really tough place to play. Georgia won most of its home games because Georgia's kind of a winning program. But was Georgia the kind of stadium that made opposing fans afraid? Probably was not. But it's important to note that when things change, we should notice. And Go back and look at the big home games that Georgia's played in the Kirby Smart era alone. Think about Auburn in 2016. Think about Mississippi State in 2017. Pick any number of moments from the 2019 season. Not a great slate of home games, but a few moments where, from my mind, I've gone to a lot of these stadiums. I think Georgia right now is just as loud as any. Now, the winning seems to be taking care of itself because Georgia's a good team. But as far as that atmosphere that Georgia fans want to create, I think Dog fans should give themselves a little bit of credit because, from my mind, it certainly looks like Georgia is on its way to creating that and to kind of shift gears to the clutch and talk about something completely different. I loved Connorani's piece at DawgNation.com this morning, also kind of about Georgia fans as well, and their response to what has been going on with Luke Ford. And we actually got a sense of finality on this yesterday, and I just think this is despicable. Ford, as you know, former four-star signee at Georgia as a part of its 2018 class, but as a tight end, didn't play a ton last year. He's got a family situation he's dealing with, a sick relative, and wanted to transfer back to his home state and go play for Lovie Smith at Illinois. Well, for a long time, we didn't hear anything from the NCAA on the Luke Ford transfer. Well, now it comes out yesterday, and I think we got Ford on Twitter on this. He says, my waiver got denied. Thanks for all your support. It's all in the Lord's timing. So Ford's trying to keep a good attitude about this, but the NCAA denies his appeal for immediate eligibility, even though it's granted it to, obviously, Justin Fields and Tate Martell, the quarterback now at Miami. This would seem to be a very uneven way of handling this and seemingly preferential treatment for high-profile cases. And in this instance, what I think the NCAA probably thought was going to be a pretty low-profile, very, no one's going to notice a tight end at Illinois. Well, what the NCAA didn't realize is this was a guy that had played at Georgia. Georgia's a massively engaged fan base. There's going to be a lot of uproar and outrage about this. I'm not so sure the uproar and the outrage is going to do anything. I'm not sure it changes anything about this. I think the NCAA, I think its greatest asset from its own perspective is the fact that it has zero shame. It simply does not care how bad anyone thinks that it is. It doesn't care how frequently anyone notices its incongruent way of handling things. Just look at the kid glove light treatment that North Carolina's basketball program has gotten. You see an example of that. This is a shameless body, and so the fact that they've done wrong by Luke Ford, I don't think anybody associated with the NCAA loses any sleep about this whatsoever. But Georgia fans have noticed, and at the very least, they are going to call out the NCAA for what seems to be an inexplicable level of contradictions in terms of how it's handling its transfers here and the transfer portal stuff. And, for a lot of people, there's just very little justifiable reason to support the NCAA as a body when it can't even get something as simple as this right. Let me also get ready to wrap up the program here, and I will tell you as we do so that on 960 The Ref this morning, there was a little news involving the Diamond Dogs. 960 The Ref is our radio partner there in Athens, and this morning, Georgia baseball coach Scott Strickland was on the show, and according to Strickland on 960 The Ref, Emerson Hancock, who is the star ace pitcher for the Georgia Bulldogs, he's not going to pitch this weekend at Mississippi State. The quote from Strickland here is, he just needs a little bit of a breather. It's what's best for him and our team. Just some soreness. He is fine. So I'm going to take Strickland at his word on that. But that's definitely eye-opening to hear no Emerson Hancock for Georgia in a really tough road series at Mississippi State. That's going to be a tough one for the Diamond Dogs there, and we certainly wish Hancock well, and hopefully by next weekend he'll be back and in better shape. One thing that continues to be in very good shape, though, is our Gator Hater Update. Here on DawgNation, we believe that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater. In 908 days, that's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. That's good news. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. Boy, we tried to cram a lot of stuff in today's program. Hopefully we touched it all and got it all taken care of. And we're certainly glad to have you be a part of it as our R.S. Andrews Cool Down rolls in now. Your chance for questions and comments. And it's all brought to you by our friends at R.S. Andrews. Air, heating, plumbing, electrical. Last night I was kind of just sitting at home. It's one of those things like when you're working, you got young kids and all that. There's that moment when you finally just kind of get to sit down and relax is always like a really good feeling. And sometimes it's not until well after dark. It's 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and you're finally just kind of sitting down on the couch for the first time. But last night, as I sat down, I had this feeling of this little bit of touch of air conditioning just kind of hit me on the cheek. And I was like, oh, that feels really good. And if you don't get that feeling in your house when you turn on the AC, if you don't get that cool sensation kind of running down your spine, that means you want the folks from R.S. Andrews to help you out. They'll get you cooled down. They'll get your house back the way it needs to be. So check them out online at rsandrews.com. Okay, we can talk about anything you want to off the top of the show. I'm curious about your thoughts on Georgia, Florida, as I addressed earlier. I like this game in Jacksonville. I think when goofball Dan Mullen calls it a Florida home game, I think it puts it at risk of being able to stay there, just to be frank. And I think that deep down, Kirby would probably like the game in Athens. And I think that at one point, he might consider using Mullen's own words as a way of getting this game in Athens. And I think he'd be willing to go to Gainesville every other year as a way of getting what he wants, was a chance to host recruits on a major type home game. And there's no doubt Florida would certainly provide that opportunity. I hear Connor Riley's microphone coming on. That means he must want to weigh in on this.
There's actually something we can't talk about. There's one thing that we cannot talk about. It's the biggest movie in the world. Comes out tonight. I'm going to see it at 1:30 a.m.
Okay.
And we can't talk about the Avengers because you were just clueless on it.
I'm not clueless on it, nor am I anti-Avengers. I've told you before, like, my kids are just not that into superheroes. Maybe one day they will. I still have a pretty young kid. So when it comes to like the folklore of like the Avengers and the Marvel heroes in general, I just don't know. I just don't know that much about it. I've seen like the first Avengers movies, but I don't really remember it all that much. So I'm not anti-Avengers or anything like that, but I probably won't go see this movie because A, I don't really get to go see that many more movies, and B, I just don't really know like the story all that much. I know there's like some characters have died and things like that, but it seems like they remake these movies all the time. So does it really matter if someone actually dies? They
only remake Spider-Man, and I'm not going to get into the complicated reasons of why they've continued to remake Spider-Man.
Okay.
Just saying, interesting.
Well,
Brandon Adams, man of the people, except when it comes to the most popular movie franchise of the past decade.
I'm not anti-Avengers. I want people to see it. I want people to enjoy it. Maybe I'll catch up with it later on. Y'all know when it comes to like, big multiplex popcorn flicks, I'm more of a Star Wars guy than a comic book guy, I guess. Most of y'all are probably already aware of that. All right, we'll dive in here and get any kind of comments you want to. We'll talk Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville. We'll keep the conversation going with the Georgia home field advantage. Really anything. We'll do some recruiting stuff, kind of anything in between there as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down today. All right. Mark Godfrey says the portal's going to ruin college football. And listen, I'm a little concerned about stuff like that too. Now, I joked off the top of the program that when it comes to like college football, I'm a traditionalist. So anything that's a major change the way the business has been done in the past, I am automatically skeptical about it. Now, in some respects, it's a good thing. In some respects, it's a bad thing. I mean, I'm a big believer that if institutions have existed for a long time, there's a reason they have existed. And when you start poking and prodding at them, I think you actually rip at the fabric that holds our society together. That's just a belief that I have. However, it's not always a good thing to resist change. And there is at least some possibility that more freedom for player movement that we've kind of seen evolve over the last couple of years, that ends up being a good thing. I think the way that we're rushing into this kind of headlong to the wind, if I'm using that phrase correctly, I think is potentially very dangerous. I just do. I think when you impact the stability of the programs, I think you impact the stability of the sport. And I'll be the first to tell you, the fact that coaches can hop from job to job to job and essentially tear up their contracts every step along the way, the fact that players cannot, that's really unfair. But players are more important than coaches. If you had your choice of having the best players or the best coach, you would take the best players every single time. So when you allow players the same freedom you allow coaches, you affect the stability of the sport because, listen, there are a small number of really impactful head coaches, and Georgia probably has one. But for the average program, you could just trade coaches around, and it would not make that big of a difference. But when you start taking the players off the programs, off the rosters, at that point in time, you have really put the programs themselves in risk. So by giving the players the same level of freedom you've given the coaches, you have put the sport into a bit of jeopardy. That doesn't sound super fair, but I think there's a chance that's actually true. Taveda Taylor says football, Marvel, WWE, and anime. Yeah, now I'm a huge WWE guy. The anime I don't know as much about. But the but the WWE stuff, I'm more of a classic WWE guy than I am a modern times WWE guy. I don't get to see as much of like the new matches as they, but I can talk to you about some like 80s and 90s wrestling as much as you want to. Sean Thomas says, think they would do an Atlanta Jacksonville with Florida, basically a rotation there. So I may be wrong about this, but I believe that once you don't play this game in Jacksonville every year, I believe you can never go back and play it in Jacksonville again. I know that may sound really, really weird, but the connection to Jacksonville is the fact that you do it every single year. So people that travel down there oftentimes will stay in the same condo year after year. They'll do the same stuff year after year. I think that consistency of tradition keeps that in place. If you ever did a thing of, well, it's going to be in Athens one year, Gainesville the next year, and then Jacksonville the year after that, and then, or maybe, as the commenter suggested, and also add an Atlanta rotation into that too. Once you're only going to Jacksonville every third year, every fourth year, I think the number of Georgia fans who would travel to the game would actually go down. The stadium would probably still be full, but in terms of what makes Georgia-Florida special, which is the atmosphere around the stadium, I don't think you get as much of that anymore. At that point in time, you were literally just playing a neutral site game in some random Florida city. It's not the Jacksonville of world's largest outdoor cocktail party fame anymore. So that's what I kind of believe. And that may be kind of weird, but I do believe that playing the game in Jacksonville requires playing it there every year. Otherwise, it's just going to go away. Christopher Jacobs says the Attitude Era was the best for the WWE back when it was still known as the WWF, and I totally agree with that. Ro Hawkins releasing his top 7 home field advantages. LSU at night, Georgia, A&M, Penn State, Big House at Michigan, Clemson, Wisconsin. So what's funny about that list is, some of the same people who picked on Georgia's placement in this list also picked on the Big House at Michigan, because Michigan is a fan base not known to be super loud. I haven't been to a game in Ann Arbor, so I can't say for one way or another how true that is. Many of you said yesterday that the early noon starts affects the Georgia atmosphere. Well, Michigan plays most of its home games at noon. That's when Michigan prefers to play its games at noon. I don't even think they... Am I wrong about this, that Michigan didn't play a night game at home until a couple of years ago? That was the first night game in the history of the stadium?
I believe it was a game against Notre Dame.
But recently,
yeah,
right?
It's a recent thing. They do not play at night there in Michigan.
So I would say that probably hurts the Michigan home crowd. I guess one of the things I've been wanting to say about this is that one of the things that I hear from time to time is that the Georgia atmosphere is hurt by a large body of older alumni that don't want to make a bunch of noise. And I would say in that regard, Georgia's no different than anybody else. I mean, I've been to opposing stadiums. Everybody's got their distinguished alumni that aren't exactly, painting their face and,
the wine and cheese crowd.
The wine and cheese crowd, yeah. Now, it's thought that Michigan has a lot of those, that the majority of the stadium may be sort of wine and cheese types. But I wouldn't say, and Connor, you're a younger person, so you may have a totally different perspective on this than me. I wouldn't say that Georgia has more wine and cheese fans than the average program does. Would you say that?
No, I mean, it's not like North Carolina basketball fan base, which has sort of a very established reputation of being a wine and cheese crowd.
That's another good example. North Carolina basketball.
I think for the most part in the SEC, I don't think there's a big line, just like discriminating between the various fan bases. I think they're all sort of the same makeup. You have your very few high-end socioeconomic status people who, sit in the suites and enjoy the game that way. And then you have the common folk who I'd much rather be watching the game with in the stands, who are, having a great conversation, maybe not having a beer, but they should be having a beer. They've had alcohol before the game.
They're theoretically
metaphorically, in a perfect world, they're having a beer and a hot dog in their laps, just all out enjoying the game.
So, I mean, from my vantage point in the press box, I look straight down on where, other than the suites, like the most wine and cheese part of the whole stadium is that sort of 50-yard line on, I guess, the south side. The truth is, I can't get the direction straight.
You never go with directions.
You never go with directions. I think it's the 50-yard line on the south side. Those are very, very exclusive, seats. Among the regular bleachers, that's as exclusive as you can get. But for the big games, that bunch is standing up the entire time. I mean,
Yep.
you watch Georgia against Notre Dame or Texas A&M this year, some games like that. I mean, that group won't be sitting down at all. Now, they're not maybe cheering as loudly as the other side of the stadium is. I'll grant you that. But they're also not, monocles dropping in soup because somebody else is trying to cheer.
Do people still wear monocles?
I don't know. My other go-to move on that is an ascot. You know what an ascot is?
Oh, come on. I'm a
Uh,
man of means, Brandon. Come on.
those are my two distinguishing characteristics of wine and cheese folks. Monocles, which is like the little eyepiece, and the ascot, which is sort of like a bandana that you tie around your neck. Eric Neely asking more about the violation. So we don't know. He says, were any recruiting violations committed by the two that have been fired and suspended? We don't know. But I'm sticking with my line on this from yesterday, Eric, which is ultimately I don't think this is something to be worried about. I don't. The point that I made yesterday is sometimes there's going to be a gap in between what we want to know, what we do know. And when a Georgia recruiting staffer is fired, the availability of information is going to exceed the desire for information is going to exceed the availability of information by about 100-fold. And in that gap, we tend to put something interesting or something potentially scandalous. But most workplace scenarios are actually kind of boring. And whatever it was that led to Daisha King being fired, and Lukman Abdullah being put on suspension, my guess is the actual details are more boring than interesting. So that's just my word on that, my thought on that. Marquise Major says, any word on Lawrence Cager? And I haven't heard much on Cager as of late. Kirby hasn't talked about Cager on the record at all. Hasn't talked about Eli Wolf on the record either. I don't completely understand why that is the case, because you talk about the signees all the time. Why can't you talk about the two graduate transfers? I don't understand the rule about that.
So I can explain this.
By all means.
So they are not officially members of the team yet because there is no letter of intent for them to sign. And therefore, it's sort of, you can't talk about a prospective student athlete who isn't officially with the team yet. So once they graduate from Tennessee and Miami and enroll at Georgia officially, Georgia can then issue comments and statements on these players.
So how do we know they're coming to Georgia then? Because they've just committed?
Just because they've committed, yeah.
Okay.
Same as
that
a
makes
recruit.
sense. Oh, that makes sense. Steve Shaffini, one of our good Facebook commenters, has a good point. Maybe the last great monocle may have been Mr. Peanut from the Planners commercials. By the way, this is not an ad. This is free stuff. This is a free plug. So other day I was walking around Kroger and I noticed that they got Planners cheese balls again. You ever had those?
Ooh.
That's a great snack. That's a great snack. For a long time they didn't make them, but I believe they're back now. That's a great
I'm
snack.
more of an Utz cheese balls guy. Just being from the Northeast in that area of the country, Utz is a very popular brand up there. But I'm a big cheese balls fan, and I don't know if you remember this, but in the SEC Country days, we got one of those giant shipments of cheese balls, and they left it on my desk for some reason I can't explain.
I do vaguely remember this.
And that thing was emptied in about a week. And,
yeah.
And I put a significant dent into that.
I do vaguely remember that, but I'm also a big fan of the Mr. Peanut guy from Planners. I've always felt like he looks very distinguished. All right, over here on YouTube just for a moment. Jacob Thompson says, are there good Facebook commenters? Come on, there are some good Facebook commenters. Stacy Goebel says, please no entertainment tonight. Please, please, please. You gotta let us have a little bit of fun, Stacy. I do appreciate what you want, but you gotta let us have a little bit of fun. We just try to be relaxing, just kind of talk about whatever. Cliff Vane says, I think that Kirby does not want to show his wild cards. The wide receivers coming in are big time. Well, the funny thing about that, though, Cliff, is that Kirby has actually, I think, certainly increased the level of expectation for Dominic Blaylock. I think it's really interesting and, I guess, semi-weird, not in a bad way, just weird from what you'd expect from Kirby, in the fact that he does not publicly de-recruit freshmen as much anymore. Maybe he just got a lot of really good ones, but he doesn't sort of soften the expectations for Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith, and based on G-Day, maybe those reasons are very quite justified. Excited about Dominic Blaylock, mentioning him multiple times in spring press conferences. Pickens hasn't talked about quite as much. The grad transfer thing we just addressed. But Kirby I think has raised expectations for these Georgia freshmen, Blaylock especially. And I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I don't remember a time when Blaylock has or Kirby has spoken as frequently and as pronounced as he has about any incoming player like he has about Blaylock. And, I I am the leader of the Dominic Blaylock bandwagon, so I'm thrilled by this news. But I do find it interesting that, he's hyping up a player this much and putting these kind of expectations on a guy who has still not yet stepped foot on the Georgia campus.
So I'm getting criticized a lot for starting with Facebook every day for comments. Daniel Borden, Top Fan, was talking about this. So I think that part of my thing is I just go across my browsers for whatever reason. I always have Facebook on the far left. So you're right. I need to start with the YouTube comments from time to time. Tram Dickerson says, this is a good question. Which 2019 freshman will be a household name by November? And I think there are probably now a handful. Probably more freshmen on that list now than I would have had prior to G-Day for sure, which is potentially a dangerous thing. But no doubt, I think it's Blaylock. It'd be very surprising if it's not, especially if he is the punt returner. He's going to be on the field a lot, if that be the case. I would also say Pickens, but if I will say that it seems hard to have two breakout freshman receivers, but I'm still high on Pickens. So I'm going to give you two there. And I'm going to give you at least three on defense. Nolan, as surprising as this is to me, it seems like N'Kobe is in that realm. And I believe because of the way that he plays, I believe that Lewis Seen's in that conversation too.
I was going to – Blaylock, Smith, and Dean seem pretty safe bets right now. And based off the way he played in the spring game, I think you might have to throw Seen in there.
Yeah.
He's working in there now. There's been a lot of talk about, LeCount's status at safety, and a lot of people thought Otis Reese would be the guy that did that. But Reese, in part because he was sick mostly the last weekend and going into the G-Day game, didn't quite have the spring a lot of people thought he could have. Seen was maybe the most impressive freshman on G-Day just in terms of his on-field performance. So if he keeps getting better like that, he's already got, he's already bigger than LeCount from just a size and frame aspect. I easily envision him certainly being on Georgia special teams and maybe even finding a way onto the field in some of those pass-heavy packages that Georgia likes to employ.
I've said this before, because Seen is a big hitter, I think that's just going to get fans' attention, and it should. That's a valuable commodity to have, especially when you're the entirety of your defensive secondary may not always do that as well as it could. Having a guy that can come up there and lay some thumps, that's a really good thing. I apologize for not remembering, but Channing Tindall and Quay Walker were both on the red team on Saturday, right?
Correct.
So that would lead you to believe that as of right now, Dean has passed Tindall and Walker, right? Don't want to read too much in.
Kirby's pumped the brakes, saying don't read too much into that. But it's not something, but it's also not nothing.
Yeah, because also on the red team you had Jordan Davis, you had Malik Herring. In the case of Davis, I think it'd be very surprised if Davis is not a starting nose guard for Georgia this season. But Kirby's also the one over the years that has said we like to do ones-on-ones. We like to do best on best, and pretty clearly, if you watch the two hype videos, both teams had its own hype video. The black team hype video was defense, and the red team hype video was offense. They were clearly touting this as the offense versus the defense. So, Kirby may say that, but the overall theme of G-Day, just from being there, was the red team is the offense, the black team is the defense, and there's a lot of imagery around that. By the way, speaking of that, I don't remember if this has ever been done in the past. I thought this was kind of a nice touch. Y'all know I like the pageantry of G-Day. Even if the football is not always quite as meaningful as I want it to be, I like the pageantry of G-Day. An awesome step in that direction. A really, really cool thing. And maybe this has always happened, but for some reason I can't quite remember it. The fact that the red team and the black team had separate entrances, that the red team came in from the west end zone, the traditional tunnel for Georgia. The black team on the other side of the field came in where the visitors would enter the field from on a typical game day Saturday. The fact that they entered the field at different times from different sides of the stadium, that was a way of kind of keeping it real, or at least, air quotes real. I thought that was a pretty good job by Georgia for doing that. Maybe they've always done that. I just don't remember it being that way. But I thought that was a pretty good job.
So one of the things I liked about the G-Day is sort of pageantry, but it's afterwards. Natrez talked about this on our post-game show after, and the Georgia football account put a video out of this. I've said spring games are meaningless. I'm actually kind of anti-spring game. However, to the players, I do think it matters because they showed video of like the winning team meal and the losing team meal. winning team had, steak, lobster, shrimp, macaroni and cheese, any dessert, you name it, any food you wanted, it was there. Losing team had to have some beans and weenies. And I know beans and weenies are good, when you don't got a lot going on, but when you see a guy eating steak and you're eating beans and weenies, that I think that might motivate you a little bit more.
Mark Richt said at one time, and I forget what year this was, but a lot of the players like the beanie weenies better than the steak.
Yes.
But you're right.
Got to change that.
The videos that you first of all, I mean, sophisticate your palate just a little bit, young people. But the videos they put out now, where you do have almost like the white tablecloth type thing for the winning team. If nothing else, that's really fun. So I like the show behind all of it. Randy Stalvey asked about Tresman Marshall. Is he hurt? Yeah, he's dealt with a shoulder injury. He and Ryan Trouble Davis, 2 linebackers that did not participate really this spring. Now, they had a chance to be present during some practices, and the honest truth is I don't know if either ever did any drills, but I do know they were at least dressed in uniform kind of, out there. So they had a chance to absorb some this spring. I'm talking about based on what I saw. They may have done a lot more than I didn't see. But based on what I saw, they were absorbing some during practice, but really neither a factor going through practice. Davis because of what I believe is a knee, and Marshall, based on what I'm pretty sure, is a
Marion
shoulder.
Martin Corbin asked on Facebook earlier, who's the first Bulldog taken? I'm a very big NFL draft guy. I think Brandon being anti-NFL draft is one of his worst, if not the worst, opinion he has. I'm a big fan of the NFL and the NBA draft, 2 of my favorite sporting events. I'm pretty certain DeAndre Baker is going to be the first Georgia player taken. From a prospect standpoint and from a pro standpoint, I think he was the best pro, or closest to being ready to be a pro on Georgia's team last year. But the closer we get into the draft, the less and less confident I am that he's actually going to be taken tonight. There are a lot of, he certainly has an argument as the best cornerback in this draft, and he was, bar none, the best defensive back in football last year. But there are a lot of corners that are similar to him. You mentioned LSU's Greedy Williams, who's just a better athlete than Baker is, even though Baker's a better on-field football player. Washington's Byron Murphy is a guy I really like. Temple's Rocky Ya-Sin, who's from the Georgia area.
Great name.
Great name for a defensive back. Rocky Ya-Sin. Love the name. He's a guy who's probably going to go in the first round tonight. And there's not a lot of differentiating factors between those top 4 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, why is Baker dropping?
Part of it might be that he's, I think the big difference between Williams and Baker is just the athleticism. And I think NFL teams and, people and scouts in general just tend to sort of value athletic traits maybe more so than, already polished on-field product, because they believe they can coach you up more so than they can make you run faster. And as far as the differences between Murphy and Baker, Washington's put out a lot of really great defensive backs in recent years. Not saying that Kirby Smart hasn't, but Murphy's a guy who, has a ball hawk reputation, which Baker, as great as he was, did not really have that in Georgia. Only 2 interceptions this past year. But really, I just think it comes down to team preferences, and I think a big thing that might actually keep Baker out is the Kansas City Chiefs traded out of the first round to get a pass rusher from Seattle. I think if the Chiefs were on the board at 29, I'd feel a lot better about Baker's chances of going in the first round, but that's sort of one less seat at the table. And I just think there's a chance Baker is the guy, of those top 4 cornerbacks I just mentioned, Baker is the guy who's left standing. Now, the team that gets him at the beginning of the second round on Friday night is going to be very, very, very happy.
Tavares Taylor in our Facebook comment section says that Baker's speed may hurt him. And, the more I pay attention to this, I think the notion of that straight line speed as measured in these pro days and combines, I don't think that predicts player success at all. Now, I don't have the numbers to back it up, but I'm just starting to feel like that's not really that crucial to me. That for a guy like Baker, it's more about ball skills and other things. And, I mean, listen, look at a guy like Jerry Rice, for instance. I mean, Rice.
Compiler.
Stop. Don't do this. But, by combine metrics, I mean, I don't know that Rice stands head and shoulders above anybody else, and yet it's hard to keep up with him on the field. Now, I don't know where Baker does rank from a speed standpoint compared to these other cornerbacks. I just don't know. But what I do know is I never saw anybody run past him in, 3 years worth of starting cornerback at Georgia, and ultimately that matters to me more than anything else. Tavares may be right, and that may be why Baker gets passed over in the first round, because it's safer to take someone who measured faster at a pro day or a combine. But ultimately, I think the Baker has proven himself as a football player. Now, Robert Hosea goes on the record with a strong take and says, mark it down, Baker taken in the first round by the Raiders. Raiders have 2 first-round picks.
24 and 27. I think if he goes in the first round tonight, I think it'll be either 26 to the Colts or 27 to the Raiders.
Is Devin White going to get drafted ahead of Roquan Smith?
The way it looked,
the position that Roquan had a year ago.
I don't think Devin White is on the board. I think he's taken before the 8th pick tonight. Now,
Tampa maybe. Is it Tampa at 5?
Tampa at 5. Part of the reason he's going to go higher is there were 3 quarterbacks taken in the top 7 picks last year. As a football player, I think Roquan Smith was better than all of them. This year, it looks like as of right now, there's only going to be 1 quarterback definitely taken. Kyler Murray, I think he's going to be the first pick in the draft tonight. After that, there's talk of Daniel Jones, this Duke quarterback.
Wait, you think only 1 quarterback is taken in the first round?
No, 1 quarterback is taken in the top, 5, 6, 7 picks, which bump Roquan down a little bit, whereas Devin White doesn't have that obstacle. I think White goes maybe 5 to Tampa tonight. That's where he's been commonly mocked. Frank DiCarlo Jr. asks, he hopes that Jonathan Ledbetter gets drafted. I do think he's going to get picked. I think maybe around 5 for him. He's a guy who, sort of like Michael Bennett who's done it for Seattle and Philadelphia last year. A guy who can play on the outside a little bit on run-stopping downs and is a good run-stopper, and then bump in as a defensive tackle in the pass rush.
I had a chance to talk to Ledbetter about something at Pro Day because one of the things I think that he's one of his most valuable commodities for Georgia was his leadership. Ledbetter just kind of comes across as this professorial guy. Now, part of that's because
he's a professional.
Yeah, part of that's because he wears glasses, and so I just think anybody who's wearing glasses is smart. So I probably think Ledbetter may be smarter than he is because he's wearing these glasses all the time. I just like eyeglasses. But he does come across, it kind of calls him a professional. He kind of comes across as that kind of just buttoned up professional type guy. And I asked him, how do you convey that to NFL teams in a period where all it seems to really matter is, how much you bench, how fast you run, your overall kind of, measurable specs. And he kind of went into, his reasoning for, kind of how he tries to approach that. And I think a lot of that for him ends up being some of those face-to-face conversations, the interview process, find out about the person behind the player. I think it's one of those things that's going to benefit Ledbetter because there's no way that Ledbetter doesn't make a locker room better. Now, obviously, I'm rooting for Ledbetter, so I guess take that with a grain of salt. But there's no way that Ledbetter doesn't add to a locker room community, as opposed to taking something away. One of these locker room lawyers that's kind of always, sort of dividing people up. And I don't see Jonathan Ledbetter being that kind of guy. And so, all things being equal, it feels like Ledbetter's the kind of player you'd want on your team.
I think he's going to be, a guy sort of like R.B. Jones, former Georgia player who, was a late-round pick. But, just sort of because of the position he plays, he's able to stay in the league for a while and, sort of prolong his career. I saw someone earlier asked about who the Falcons might take tonight. There's a lot of smoke out there about the Falcons maybe trading up. I think if they trade up, a guy like Ed Oliver out of Clemson.
You got to stop trading up. Listen, this is not a Falcons show, but Falcons are my favorite NFL team. You got to stop this trading up stuff. You can't sacrifice your draft picks. You have to collect your draft picks. And the fact of the matter is, Thomas Dimitroff and this Falcons decision-making body, they're not good enough at selecting talent to identify just one player who's going to really pan out, even at the beginning of the draft, even for a guy like Ed Oliver, who, to me, it seems like the exact opposite of Jonathan Ledbetter. Now, I'm not saying that Ledbetter's as good a player as Ed Oliver is. I'm saying that I think Ed Oliver's kind of a jerk. And he does not he comes across as a total jerk. I think
Ed, to wear a jacket on the sideline.
I think Ed Oliver comes across as the kind of guy that takes from your locker room, the kind of guy that could potentially divide a locker room. I'm not telling you I wouldn't want him under any circumstances. I'm not trading up for Ed Oliver. I'm not. I
think if they stay at 14 and he's there, I think they pick Christian Wilkins out of Clemson.
I'd be fine. I'd be fine with that. But the Falcons have a terrible history of trading up. Now with Julio Jones,
yes, they won the Julio Jones trade because Julio Jones is still in the NFL and none of those Browns guys are not.
But you got to collect draft picks, y'all. You got to collect draft picks.
The Julio trade, when Julio wasn't healthy, a few years and they were sort of the end of the Mike Smith era. That trade set them back because they just didn't have the depth, that other NFL teams had. Can I give you a over-under that you might not like? Or that some people might not like? I have no issue with it. Over-under 1.5 Georgia Bulldogs drafted by the New England Patriots this weekend.
Ooh.
A lot of the Georgia players in this draft fill the needs that the Patriots have.
Yeah, so here's where I'm a total hypocrite. I don't like the Patriots, but I like the Patriots drafting Georgia players. I think it says something nice about Georgia. So over-under, if it ends up being 2 Patriots drafted, the fact that Saban made Belichick wear that with the Alabama sweatshirt is going to look completely ridiculous. So I'd probably go under just because it just seems like the safer bet, but I'd love for it to be 2.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love for it to be.
I definitely think it's at least 1. I think DeAndre Walker is someone they could target in the 3rd round. They have a huge need at wide receiver with Mecole Hardman and Riley Ridley. I think that's an option they can go. A lot of people have said Isaac Nauta to the Patriots. We're interested, personally as a Patriots fan, I'll be interested to see sort of where they go with the tight end position in this draft. The guy I would love, he's not going to fall to him, but T.J. Hawkinson, tight end out of Iowa. Love that guy. I think he's going to be a very, very good NFL tight end. I see Irv Smith and G. Grace Bama in our YouTube comment section has talked about him. He's been mentioned there a lot. He's
gone from Alabama then.
What?
He's gone from Alabama.
Irv Smith?
Yeah.
Yes. No, I'm saying he's someone who the Patriots could take.
Right. I'm saying you're
just making sure he's not at Alabama anymore.
That's one of those guys I'm glad to get out of this league.
Yes.
I'm
Irv
glad
Smith
to get him out of this league.
He's certainly not. I mean, it's unfair to compare any tight end to Gronk. He's more of a, pass-catching tight end more so than a actual run blocker.
So John Anthony, to change the subject just slightly in our Facebook comment section, was asking about there is a lot of online chatter as of late about a commitment video dropping soon. And listen, that's not my news to break. I don't know who it is. I do have my suspicions about who it might be, but that's not really my news to break. So the answer is I don't know who this commitment video is going to be, but I would have some guesses.
Jacob Thompson. See, this is how you should have gone after criticizing Ed Oliver. Ed Oliver's a jerk. Plus, I heard he puts ketchup on hot dogs, which is just gross.
Thank you.
Wholeheartely agree with that comment, Jacob. I think anyone that puts ketchup on hot dogs, you have to have serious questions about.
Yeah, that's probably true. But Chris Branham says he thinks that Andy Isabella will be the number 1 pick to the New England Patriots. Here's what I'll tell you. Andy Isabella is the greatest college football player of all time. Seeing him up close and personal for Georgia against UMass, Isabella may be the greatest receiver this sport's ever produced. So I don't know if he gets drafted in the first round or not, but he's a pretty impressive guy himself.
Do you think Atlanta, the Falcons, select a Georgia player this weekend? Atlanta's taken 1 Georgia Bulldog in the last 10 NFL drafts.
So here's my take on this. I think that it's probably not true that the Falcons exclude Georgia players from their draft board. That's probably not true. However, what is true are 2 things. There is no doubt the Falcons, and I say this as a Falcons fan, although I'm obviously a much bigger Georgia fan, but I say this as a Falcons fan. There's no doubt that the Falcons are probably jealous of the marketing success that Georgia has enjoyed. There's no doubt. It'd be a lot easier for the Falcons to make money if there was no Georgia siphoning off the football dollars in the state. So is there a little bit of a rivalry in the boardroom behind closed doors between the Falcons and Georgia? I believe that there probably is. I believe that the Atlanta Falcons are probably irritated that in the state of Georgia, the biggest football team is not an NFL team, it's a college football team. I believe that probably bothers them, and therefore they're probably not looking to accentuate a Georgia player for those very same reasons. The other thing that's definitely true is Connor mentions only 1 guy in the last 10 years. Was that Akeem Dent?
Akeem Dent,
yeah,
3rd round of the 2011 draft.
There are high-profile examples from years before that. Taking Steve Broussard, a running back from Washington State, over Rodney Hampton. That's a disastrous decision. Our apologies to Dennis Wilson, who always watches us on YouTube as a Miami fan. Taking Jamie German over Hines Ward in the 3rd round is a disastrous decision. Taking Vic Beasley over Todd Gurley in the 1st round, different position, but Gurley was available. They chose Beasley instead. That will look to be a disastrous decision because on all the major DraftNix sort of talent boards, Gurley was the higher-rated player. Georgia passed on him for a position. The Falcons passed on him for a position of need. That looks like a big mistake. So while I don't believe it's true that the Falcons intentionally exclude Georgia players or intentionally avoid Georgia players, I think there's enough circumstantial evidence over the time that makes the Falcons' decision not to have drafted more Georgia players look more suspect.
Yep.
Is that all you got for that?
I'm going through the ketchup hot dog. I've clearly touched a nerve here with my ketchup stance. Mary Martin Corbin does bring up a correct point. The only people who are allowed to put ketchup on hot dogs are children because ketchup is a children's condiment.
Miriam, that's actually a really good take. It's a very, very good take. I told you I don't eat hot dogs anymore.
I know you don't. Again, this is I thought you were a man of the people, but you're no better than those monocle people who eat their soup.
I've gotten to where I do this with my kids a lot of time. They want to buy stuff, and to me, hot dog is not food; it's a food-like substance. And a lot of times, my kids will be like, "Hey, Daddy, can we have like fruit roll-ups or something like that?" And I'm always like, "No, that's not food. That's a food-like substance."
Fruit roll-ups are definitely food.
Like the other day, my son in the supermarket was like, "Daddy, can I have some fruit roll-up?" I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Because it looks like packaging. Like it doesn't even look like food." Keith Volt says, "A rivalry between the Falcons and UGA. If that's true, the Falcons brass is dumber than I thought." Here's the one thing that nobody ever wants to talk about, but I mean, it's just a fact. If you live in the state of Georgia, and for some of our audience that you don't live in Georgia, but for those who do live in Georgia, especially the Atlanta area, y'all, I mean, take somebody like me. I'm a working guy. I got a family. I got 2 kids. I am not made of money. I don't have like an unlimited amount of money to go out and buy whatever I want to buy. So when I choose to go to one team's game, even if I'm a fan of all the teams, I can't just go to every sporting event that's being played. So a lot of people have chosen to invest thousands of dollars in Georgia football games, traveling to see the team, donating to the program. The number of people who also do that same thing for the Falcons is not going to be that high, because once you choose to be a 5-figure investor in one football program, you don't have that money left to give to the Sunday team, and you better believe the Falcons are aware of that.
Gerald Harmon on Facebook. BA likes Grey Poupon on his hot dogs.
That's
great.
True.
Great comment. Great comment.
My preferred cased meat would be like a smoked sausage, a kielbasa, a bratwurst, something along those lines. That'd be my preferred cased meat.
Who only puts ketchup on their hot dogs?
Who's that?
Dan Mullen.
I'm sure Dan Mullen would eat a hot dog with ketchup, and that'd just be him any day of the week. Any day of the week. By the way, Dennis Wilson has weighed in on Jamie German, so we glad I got him involved on that. Cliff Payne says Falcons are traitors to all UGA fans. That's a fact. I wouldn't go so far as saying that. I mean, I think they've made some questionable decisions when they could have drafted UGA players that they didn't. But as far as being a traitor, I'm not mad at them about anything. I mean, Falcons haven't been a traitor against Georgia, have they?
No. I mean, so actually, my friend of the program, Nick Suss, did a longer, in-depth story on SC Country last year on this, on how sort of professional teams, the frequency with which they draft, the local college guys, because, the Saints don't have a history of drafting LSU players, despite LSU frequently churning out, high-end draft picks. The Dallas Cowboys, before they took Connor Williams last year, didn't pick a lot of players out of the University of Texas in recent history. So, it is something that I think given the overlap of NFL fans and college fans, like I'm sure, Georgia fans would love if they had a bunch more Falcons, if, Jake Fromm happened to be the replacement to Matt Ryan. Or, I'm sure if there are.
Sometimes I think that's not the marketing boost that the Falcons are looking for. The way that the Atlanta, was it the Gladiators? What was the name of the AAF team?
How quickly you forget. The Atlanta Legends.
The Legends, excuse me. The way they essentially built their campaign around, or at least finally by the end of the season, come out and see Aaron Murray. I don't believe the Falcons would want to do that around a Jake Fromm or somebody like that. I don't think they would. Now, I don't think that they have a draft board that says whatever you do, don't draft Georgia players. I just think that they probably have missed an opportunity to say, ooh, all things being equal, let's take the running back from Georgia instead of the running back from Washington State, or the running back or the wide receiver from Georgia instead of the wide receiver from Miami. Frankly, over the decades, the player-specific scouting hasn't really worked out all that well. So, if it's a toss-up between a few names, maybe every now and then the better marketing might not be such a bad decision to make. That's my take on that anyway. My computer is now dead, so we got to get ready to get off the air here. Any final thought from you?
Excited. It's going to be a fun 24 hours.
I'll watch the draft tonight.
I'm going to watch wall to wall.
I don't like the draft because I don't like the slander that's associated with it, but it is a good TV show.
Yep.
It's a good TV show.
I love the draft. Very excited for tonight. Going to go watch the Avengers afterwards. Going to be a fun 24 hours.
Now, if you go see the Avengers tonight, and I know that Stacey Goebel and some of the others don't like it when we talk about movies, so I'll make this quick. When you go see the Avengers tonight, you're going late tonight?
Start time 1:30 a.m.
Wow. Now, are there going to be comic book characters in the theater, you think?
God, I hope not.
I mean, if you're going to see the Avengers when it first opens, I mean, the chance
at 1:30, I feel pretty safe that those are people who are just trying to squeeze it into their schedule.
Oh no, I don't think that's the case at all. At 1:30 in the morning, you're trying to be among the first to see it, which means that you are a super fan. You're going to probably sit next to Captain America, which is creepy as can be.
Yeah,
if you're ever in a theater with someone in a costume, that's very, very.
If I see someone walking down the street in a Captain America costume, I'll cross to the other side of the street.
That's very disconcerting. And listen, I'm on record as saying dressing up as your favorite movie character, I don't think is all that different than dressing up as like no one bats an eye when the Spike Squad dresses up the way it does for Georgia football games, because that's intense passion. We support that around here. We like that. So I'm actually pretty forgiving of movie fans who want to dress up as their favorite character too, because, as I said, we tolerate this in sports. Why not allow it in other walks of life as well? However, I'm not looking to be in the theater with those people, and my guess is tonight you probably are.
I mean, I think if you go any point this weekend, it's going to be like that. Because the thing with this movie is people are going to go and want to go see it again and again and again. So.
Well, there you go.
I'll give a detailed report on if I see any Captain
do.
Americas or Incredible Hulks.
Please
in the
do.
Tonight,
my computer's dead. Any comments you want to read before we go here?
Here's one for you, Mr. Star Wars. Would you dress up as a Jedi come December?
Is the new movie coming out then?
Rise of Skywalker is coming out.
No, I'm not a costume guy. I'm not.
Though you did dress up as Batman for Halloween.
I did do that, but that was just to play along here. But I mean, that was a very out of character thing for me. When I wore that Batman costume for Before the Hedges, I probably hadn't put a costume on in 25 years before that. It's not what I am. I'm senatorial. I'm not looking to be wearing a bunch of costumes and things like that. However, I am amazed at how authentic looking the Star Wars costumes are now. And I'm sure the superhero costumes are the same way. You can buy essentially the same stuff they wear in the movie, which I find to be fascinating. So we always go to like Star Wars night for the Braves games. The costumes they have there, including this guy last year dressed up like Chewbacca, like 9 feet tall. That's actually pretty good, Connor. It's amazing how like real looking the costumes have become. So I'll go and get my picture taken with the people who are wearing them, but it's probably best that someone else wears the costumes. So good question. All right, we're going to go for now. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for bringing the cool down to you. Make sure you check them out online at rsandrews.com. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. They're the ones around here we trust to play all those positions, and you'll like them as well. And support those who support us, which means R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. We will no doubt have a DN90 up on the site for you a little bit too, so a little bit more video content coming your way, and a recap of everything with UJ Recruiting with Jeff Santella, part of this program tomorrow. So it'll be a lot of fun. We'll see you then. Hope you have a great day, everybody.